Trey Lance is apparently the unquestioned starter, whether or not Jimmy Garoppolo gets traded. But does that mean he could be a top 5 dynasty quarterback in the future? That more today on the Dynasty Newsletter. I'm your host, Adam Wilde, joined by my co-host, Chris Allen. Chris, Trey Lance, we love him. But does he have top 5 upside in Dynasty?
100%. Yeah, without a doubt. As I'm trying to dodge the sun, through my office window right now, I apologize. I should have a better setup at some point. But let's think about this, big picture standpoint, from what is the, let's say, 90th percentile outcome for Trey Lance. Because if you look at his measurables, coming out of college, we already knew, at least from an arm strength standpoint, kid's got a cannon attached to his shoulder. From a size speed standpoint, I mean, he is an imposing figure just on the field. Even if he was just a pocket quarterback and we didn't have to worry about the mobility, which we'll get to, obviously, he is a large person for the amount of power and speed that he can generate at his size. And then, of course, I mean, tying all of that together is the fact that he has one of the best offensive minds piloting what his, at least his early career arc is going to be. And if he can be pretty much everything that Lamar Jackson has been as a passer, which is in his range of outcomes, can he hit the same passes that Lamar did in the 2019-2020 timeframe with Marquise Brown? He can do that. These are things that he's capable of doing. And also he has the mobility to create enough production on the ground to be at least in the same conversation as Lamar when he won the MVP. So it's just, yes, he can do all of those things. And now, again, he also has the capability to be a threat out of the backfield. I mean, look at what San Francisco's offense is predicated on. It's nothing but explosives. You've got at least one of the, if not the most explosive pass catchers in Deebo Samuel. Look at his yards after the catch per reception last year. I mean, with or not better than Cooper Kupp. If you want to look at the total yak, I think Cooper Kupp had him, but in yak per reception, Deebo Samuel had him. Already got that. George Kittle, don't even need to touch that in terms of what he can generate, not just as a blocker, but if we're talking about just for fantasy purposes, what he can do as a receiver, assuming he's healthy, because I'm sure the haters would be like, well, he's only healthy for 5, 6, 7 games out of any particular season anyway. Whatever, but still can generate explosives as a receiver. Brandon Ayuk out of the doghouse, also capable of doing any, again, can still operate not just in the short and intermediate areas, but also can work deep as well. I mean, they've got 4, 5, 6 options probably on that offense, at least 4 to 5 options on that team, capable of generating explosives, not just as a receiver, but also as a rusher. We watched Elijah Mitchell come onto the scene just last season. And now you add a 6th option in the quarterback himself. Now, assuming he gets, again, I don't want to draw comparisons because it becomes very, cliche to talk about some of the best in the game right now. But if you think about how, what we thought of Patrick Mahomes, not in the, what was it? So he started the final game was that week 17 against Denver, was it in the 2017 timeframe? And then he took over and had his first full season in 2018. And it was just, we completely changed. In 2017, that 1 or 2 games that he started in 2017, it was he had specific throws where everybody was like, okay, it's almost like the meme of the guy sitting up in his chair, playing video games. And it was like that with Patrick Mahomes in 2017, but he just, it wasn't all there. And with Trey Lance, there were a few moments. Now, again, the few moments where it's this kid could be something. It was volatile as all hell, but he could be something. And now you give him the offseason, you give him this offense, you give him Kyle Shanahan, you give him Deebo Samuel, you give him all of these playmakers that can generate explosives. Can he be top 5? Absolutely. That should definitely be within the range of outcomes for him, just given the way that we value not just the passing acumen of an NFL quarterback, but also the rushing, which we know was within Trey Lance's capabilities. So yes, I'm 100% on board with that being a possibility for him, like not being top 5 by the end of this season, but at least in the next like 2 seasons, 3 seasons. Absolutely, without a doubt in my mind.
All right, now let me rain on the Trey Lance parade a little bit. So, all right, so when I'm requesting this thumbnail, I'm starting with can Trey Lance be top 10? I'm like, nah, not spicy enough. Like, can Trey Lance be top 5?
Yeah, we
When
got
I'm
to have
requesting
something
it, I'm
that's
like,
clickbaity enough for
yeah,
somebody to
yeah.
come and yell at us in the comments.
So then I'm like, you know what? Actually, yeah, let's do top 5. I think you could do top 5.
Right.
I think I could get on board with that. Then I think about it, I'm like, somebody's got to go. If he's going to be top 5, someone's got to go. And we just had the discussion last week. Is Kyler Murray currently a top 5 dynasty quarterback? And we said yes. So you're talking about maybe that his probably 99th percent outcome is MVP Lamar Jackson. But I mean, yeah, he's got to play MVP caliber to unseat Lamar Jackson. So that's one that's not going, because we're talking about him matching Lamar Jackson, not being better, right? So that's one that's staying in the top 5. Pat Mahomes not leaving the top 5 for anything for 10 years. Josh Allen Josh Allen had like two pretty bad years, a decent year, and then a couple incredible years. So let's just assume the incredible keeps up, not going anywhere. So now we get to Justin Herbert. Does Justin Herbert's ceiling as a passer defeat Trey Lance's ceiling as a passer plus rusher? It's where you start getting a little bit of a chance. I mean, Justin Herbert's the golden boy.
Sure.
That's going to be a tough one. That's where you start saying, okay, possible. Top 3 in my mind, not possible.
You got to squint to see it, but it's not.
So you
outlandish.
Start squinting at Herbert. Now you get to Kyler, and I can see a ton of ways in which Kyler falls out of grace because the seeds have already been planted. I mean,
we just talked about it last week.
Talked about it last week with the study habits, and it's like, I think that's probably ridiculous. I think it's probably fine. I think he should have shut it down a little bit more in his little presser or whatever. I understand he was emotional. He was probably very mad. So he didn't express himself exactly how I feel like he should have formulated his thoughts. However, he had a point. You cannot be as good as Kyler Murray is now without doing blah, blah, blah. However, the seeds of doubt are planted. And dynasty managers are very reactionary. So the seeds of doubt are planted. All we need is confirmation bias. That's where I think you could get Trey Lance into the top 5. If we have one more Kyler Murray end of season meltdown, I mean, in the playoffs, he looked disinterested. Like, flat out looked like, man, that playoff game, there was no fire where I'm like, hey, don't count the Cardinals out. I'm like, no, halftime, count them out.
Yeah, they're not. They're
count
done.
them out. This isn't it. So, there are definitely ways in which Kyler Murray could get spun out of the top 5. So I think Trey Lance's only shot is getting to top 5, getting to number 5. But I don't see him passing Herbert, and the other 3 aren't going anywhere for 10 years, man.
Probably not. But I think going back to the Kyler discussion, it's not even necessarily for me about the study habits portion. It's about the team that's around him. And it was part of my point last week. It's good for Kyler, absolutely. But it's just looking at the contracts and the amount of money that he's going to be, his cap hit against the team's roster. How are they going to expect to pull in additional talent to build around him? There's still a chance for San Francisco to build around, even more so, around Trey Lance. Let's say Trey Lance becomes, 75% of the passer that Justin Herbert is, like, while having, let's say, at least 50 to 60% of the production on the ground that Lamar is. Right. While also being on a rookie contract, allowing
550 yards rushing or something like that.
I mean, allowing San Francisco to add even more to that offense. Like, San Francisco has outs here. Arizona doesn't. Arizona is now going to watch DeAndre Hopkins get another year older. They're going to watch Zach Ertz get another year older. AJ Green, I hope he just hangs him up after the end of this season, because what's he holding on for at this point? I mean, James Conner is going to be another year older. So it's just, this is going to be a roster that even if you just take the quarterback away and just look at the skill position players associated with it, which roster are you going to choose? Are you going to choose DeAndre Hopkins, Marquise Brown, AJ Green, or are you going to take Debo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, Elijah Mitchell if TDP hits as well? It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's almost a no-brainer at that point, like for any of us. So I would think that just the skill positions alone and what San Francisco is going to be capable of doing in order to continue to build around an asset we already know to be that has the capabilities conducive to being top tier fantasy production, and not just the passing, but the rushing. I mean, Kyler, of course, has that too. But now, if you get that plus a young core and a team that has a good offensive mind and wants to build around them, I mean, it's just, again, it puts him in the conversation, assuming all of these things happen. Of course, he has to hit. He has to be a good passer. He has to be able to also still having the design runs that are going to be a part of the offense, which he did have a number of design runs like last season, like in just the small windows that we saw him in. So it's just all of those things has to happen, but it's worth thinking through if it's possible before we see this massive market shift, which could happen at the end of the 2022 season.
Especially since people are afraid to invest in Trey Lance right now because there's so much excitement around him, and rightfully so. His price might be a little elevated given the fact that we haven't really seen him play much football besides doing like having some flashes last year. I've heard people reflect upon his performance last year as terrible. Okay, no, it was not terrible. And he flashed that beautiful touchdown pass. So definitely was not terrible. We saw that he can be very, very good in this league. Let's jump to the other side of the quarterback conversation for the 49ers and look at Jimmy Garoppolo. So preface this conversation with, we've already had this discussion about Baker Mayfield. We've had this discussion about Sam Darnold. I think we've talked about Drew Lock, and I don't think Geno fits this category, but these guys, if you feel like they're not done in the NFL, you should invest in them. And I don't think that the NFL is done with Jimmy Garoppolo. Maybe they should be. Maybe he should be a high-profile backup and play the next 5 or 6 years in the Ryan Fitzpatrick role. However, have you heard anyone with any sort of standing in the NFL even think about suggesting that? I've not heard a single NFL personality speak about Jimmy Garoppolo in anything but a starter category. The only report was maybe, and this was a report for about 5 minutes, maybe backing up Tom Brady to be the starter next year, to be the franchise quarterback for the Bucks. But that's the only time that anyone has considered Jimmy Garoppolo a backup quarterback. However, in Dynasty, he's being priced as a backup quarterback. And that's because currently he is. Now, unfortunately, the 49ers love the guy, apparently, and their asking price seems to be way too high. If there's an injury, maybe you get Jimmy Garoppolo. I find it tough to believe. They gave him the $21 million last year to stay. I don't think they can do it again, man. I really don't, especially after. So last year it was a toss-up if we were going to get Trey Lance starting or backing up. This year they came out and said, look, Jimmy Garoppolo's results have nothing to do with this team anymore. This is Trey Lance's team. So that makes it really tough to give the guy $21 million when he's not even there's no opportunity for Jimmy Garoppolo to start with the 49ers, period. Nothing. He could outperform Trey Lance all through camp. He's not starting. It just doesn't, it's not conducive with the future of the 49ers, right? So he's leaving one way or another. I think that they're going to try everything in their power to not release him. That would not look great. But Kyle Shanahan seems to run things a little more than John Lynch, in my opinion. And I don't think that Kyle Shanahan does a great job in the personnel department. So that being said, would not be super surprised if they were forced to release him.
Yeah.
Maybe he goes to Seattle at that point, but I really do think Seattle likes Drew Lock. I think Drew Lock should still have some dynasty value just because Seattle, for whatever reason, I actually do believe that they might like Drew Lock. So maybe he doesn't go to Seattle. So where does he start? Well, you don't know about injuries yet. Training camp hasn't really started. You got Patrick Mahomes hurting his ankle in the first ones v ones drill of the year. Like, you can't start off the season like that with telling me that Patrick Mahomes has been helped to the sideline. Luckily, luckily that was fixed very quickly and said not a big deal. But injuries will happen, and Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be the first phone to ring. So, with that being said, I guess do you think Jimmy Garoppolo has any chance to remain on the roster, and what does that mean for his dynasty value?
No, absolutely. He shouldn't be on the roster at this point because if you think about, and these are the reports that I've read so far or I've heard so far, just coming out of San Francisco, it creates a sour locker room because there are players like leaders like within the 49ers offense that like, or not even just in the 49ers in general, that like very much respect like Jimmy Garoppolo. I mean, just look at the accomplishments that they've like been
Yeah,
able to achieve like with Jimmy. Now, I realize
or in
that
spite.
in some cases they were in spite of, but we're talking about just what a missed throw to Emmanuel Sanders away. So like it comes down to like these just the singular moments,
Yep.
but for most of the season, it's because of what Jimmy allowed them to do, or what Jimmy got them to got them to the point of being able to contend. It was with Jimmy, not always in spite of. But when it came down to those crucial moments, of course, he wasn't able to. He fumbled the bag. So it just creates, I would say, a like a sour locker room in that case. And then also, if you think about the type of offense they're going to try and install, you could not find two more dissimilar players in terms of the way that they work the pocket and like the type of passing, the type of quarterback that they are than Jimmy Garoppolo and Trey Lance. I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo, the reason why that offense was clicking and why Deebo Samuel became like the yak monster that he was is because that's where Jimmy Garoppolo, he can hit those throws across the middle. Trey Lance is still learning to do that. Trey Lance is more deep outside the numbers, like, hitting those like type of explosives like that we saw like when he was out there for that short stretch of time. So, but that needs to change in order for that offense to really thrive. I mean, Trey Lance has to be able to do both, and that's he's learned. So it's just, and also, of course, Trey Lance as a rusher, like you can't have both and expect similar results. I mean, it's just a completely separate offense that they're trying to put together at this point in time. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think that Jimmy Garoppolo, like, he'll most likely be moved. Release is probably the easiest thing like for them at this point because the way that they've tried to position or leverage what like Jimmy Garoppolo's skill set, they thought that it was a game of musical chairs and they had more chairs. There ain't no more
Yeah.
chairs.
No more chairs.
I mean, they didn't really anticipate
Not
all
if the
the
Seahawks like Drew Lock. There's no
right.
more
The
chairs.
Seahawks like Drew Lock, this whole the stuff with Watson, like moving to, and also Matt Ryan leaving Atlanta was probably something that they never really anticipated. So it's just the number of chairs that they thought might be available, and also Jimmy's timeline with the shoulder surgery. It was impossible for them to anticipate that, and also they misplayed their hand. That's on them. So they're probably going to have to wind up eating it and having to release them and not recoup anything that they thought they were going to.
Yep.
And I'm also with you that outside of cost, I'm yet to hear or see a report from an exec or somebody like along that level of leadership saying that they wouldn't want a guy like Jimmy on their team.
Right.
Like, should they be in, quarterback purgatory? I'm sure, despite what has happened, I mean, they did get a really good deal for Baker, but I'm sure the Panthers would probably prefer Jimmy Garoppolo at this point versus the trio of quarterbacks that they're stuck with at this point.
That was about to be my segue
But
to
that's
another
just
team that could use them.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that's pretty much where they find themselves. So but I do agree though that wherever he winds up being or where Jimmy winds up falling at the end of the day, I mean, he should wind up being the starter, just given the skill set that he has. I mean, he's not going to, be the guy that's going to put up quarterback one like fantasy numbers, but at least in terms of efficiency, he's been top 6, top 7 in EPA per play, like when he's been under center. That's for across multiple seasons. So he can pilot an offense. It's just they need to find one that can actually be able to pay him the salary that he feels that he's owed.
Yeah, in your 2 QB or Superflex leagues, just plug your nose and put out offers for Jimmy Garoppolo. I don't think there's any way that he doesn't start for another football team in the NFL. If not this season, then in the future. And we know, you got to have 4 to 5 quarterbacks in those leagues, even if they're like something like Marcus Mariota. So let's head over to another positional group that's got a little bit of controversy. But before we get there, let's just let you know that you need to subscribe to the Football Guys newsletter. You're going to get emails straight from Joe Bryant. They are created by Joe Bryant, Cecil Lammey, Sigmund Bloom, with all the news and notes, especially now in training camp. You need the news and notes every day. The league changes so fast. Today, you're going to get Najee Harris has an ankle injury. Tomorrow, you're going to get, oh, his foot just got stepped on. He's fine. Well, guess what? Najee Harris dropped like 8 picks in best ball drafts today because the little dot next to his name said that he had an ankle injury. So you get that 8-pick discount because you are on top of the information. Tomorrow he goes right back to his ADP because it wasn't a big deal. He just got his foot stepped on, right? So that's what you get when you subscribe to the newsletter from Football Guys. And then we take some tidbits from there, bring it over, and give you a dynasty perspective. That is the Football Guys newsletter. The next conversation is going to be Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson, 2 young running backs, both who I feel are talented. Brian Robinson was kind of like a sleeper that I really liked that ended up not being a sleeper because he went to a situation in which he can't contribute in year 1. So Brian Robinson's getting a lot of first-team reps. Why? Because Antonio Gibson is already dealing with a groin injury. Now, remember last year he had the ankle and foot, I believe. Definitely foot. Also think there was an ankle involved. Either way, those lower body injuries, definitely nagging, definitely can continue throughout the season. So soft tissue injuries I don't play with. If you get stepped on in training camp, goes in my don't care bucket. You got soft tissue injury in training camp and you're working off to the side and then you have to work your way back in and then you're behind and then you've got a promising rookie behind you. That tends to be a problem. So are you worried about Antonio Gibson yet? And let me preface that with, what are you even expecting from him in the first place before you're worried?
No, I'm not worried as of right now, to be quite honest. I mean, yeah, of course, this is something that injuries have been pretty much the story of his career at this point over the past, since 2020 when he was drafted. I get that. They bring in Brian Robinson, 3rd rounder, if I'm remembering correctly. So
Correct.
It's like they do have enough draft capital that they're looking for another option, but that was the expectation when he was drafted. So if anything, are we double counting at this point? Because when he was drafted, the story was that, all right, well, Antonio Gibson, he hasn't been able to hold up, whether it's been turf toe or something along those lines, like last season, even his rookie year, also battling injuries throughout multiple games. But they also, I mean, with Washington also bringing back J.D. McKissick, it was like they always have looked for other options other than Antonio Gibson. And the expectation was that in times of when he was not healthy or when he's incapable of being on the field, they would turn to J.D. McKissick or Brian Robinson. And we're already seeing that happen. And it's not like this means that Antonio Gibson is going to miss the season. And it's not like Antonio Gibson's not even going to miss week 1. But we're hearing the stories out of training camp that confirms what we thought was going to happen when he was drafted. It changes nothing for me, to be quite honest. But it confirms the narrative that we thought was going to happen when he was drafted. So it's good. That's exactly what we would expect to see. Antonio Gibson's out. Brian Robinson is going to be the one working in with the ones. Now, I think it's a good thing that we're hearing this just because it confirms what we thought about Brian Robinson. But I think it's also, I guess I don't want to overcount it because it's not like, I guess the other side of that coin would be that, I don't know, Jarrett Patterson is the one that comes in behind, right? Or we're hearing about, or they're thinking about signing because of what Justin Jackson actually just got signed earlier today by the Detroit Lions. It's like they're not fishing around in the free agent market anymore. So it just solidifies what we thought was going to happen with the draft pick. So I wouldn't oversell Brian Robinson's outlook for right now. He is the direct, I don't want to say backup because it looks like he'll probably get mixed in throughout the season anyway. Just take the workload off Antonio Gibson. But again, that's another narrative that we had discussed back when Robinson was drafted. So again, it just confirms all of our priors at this point, which again should just keep his dynasty value steady like throughout the rookie season. And if Antonio Gibson misses time, and let's say he pops up and becomes, let's say, this year's Khalil Herbert, okay, cool. But for right now, it's just the role is secure, and that's what we want in the first place.
So you've got you've got to throw cold water on the situation for one or the other. So what I've really been thinking about is like if you want to prop up Antonio Gibson, then that means you have to kind of downgrade Brian Robinson because the thing is, so if you recall when Antonio Gibson came into the league, it was he was a complete projection based on Ron Rivera and Christian McCaffrey. So you
Mhm.
had this wide receiver, converted running back coming into the league, thought he was going to be used as this crazy weapon. Ron Rivera, all he had to say was the word CMC in relation to Antonio Gibson, and Antonio Gibson's value rose to an incomprehensible level to where it was almost impossible to draft him. Now you fast forward 2 years. Now Antonio Gibson has had 2 years with 1,000 all-purpose yards, and both have been injury riddled. So essentially, if you just look at Antonio Gibson in a vacuum, all you have to tell yourself is that if he doesn't get injured, I'm basically locked into 13, 1,400 all-purpose yards. Hopefully the touchdowns are there.
Mhm.
Get yourself out of the vacuum. And it's like, okay, but he's already dealing with the groin. They drafted Brian Robinson, who they're clearly excited about. And now he's got Carson Wentz. So how are we going to get positive touchdown regression from an offense that is probably the same, to be honest? Carson Wentz is definitely better than Taylor Heineke, but as a whole, wouldn't be that difficult to see similar offensive output. So, I mean, you get out of your vacuum and you don't have much, right? And you're investing in
Mhm.
Antonio Gibson as like, so his ADP is going down, in little chunks. Like comes out, little chunk comes out. Like he's not by any means dropping in the way that let's say Clyde Edwards-Helaire has dropped. So if you look at it in that sense, Antonio Gibson is going to keep falling to a range where it's acceptable to have a decent valuation on Antonio Gibson and on Brian Robinson. Because when you
Mhm.
flip the script over to Brian Robinson, it's like in year one, he's probably going to get goal line work at 6'1, 228. Think like more like DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams workload is probably what you're going to get out of them. But the only difference is that you have to equate JD McKissick, which is like,
Right.
I don't envy people doing projections for the Washington Commanders because if you have a very clean split of Antonio Gibson between the 20s, Brian Robinson on the goal line, and JD McKissick on third downs. Now you have to predict how often they're going to be between the 20s, how many goal line attempts. Like
Yes.
that's a nightmare. And when you project that over the next 2 years, let's say we do 2 to 3 year windows, which is probably what you should do. Things change too quickly to do like your 6 or 7 year windows.
Mhm.
So let's say we look at it from a 2 to 3 year window. How do you project that 3 years out when you don't even know what it's going to look like right now?
You can't.
So really all you can do is Brian Robinson's probably getting a little too expensive already, given that he's a third round running back. Hasn't really shown that much so far, but is getting work because Antonio Gibson is injured. So tough to invest in him right now. Antonio
Mhm.
Gibson's coming down, hasn't really shown much to come down besides the groin injury. So maybe you invest in Antonio Gibson right now, but you still keep Brian Robinson earmarked. Do not get yourself in a situation where you completely count Brian Robinson out just because you're in on Antonio Gibson and it has to be a here or there type thing. It could be neither here nor there, and both of them have value. As a matter of fact, JD McKissick could still have a value if the ADPs are palatable.
Mhm.
So right now, maybe Brian Robinson a little bit too expensive. Let that settle down when we actually see the role, and it's probably more like 6 or 7 touches a game for Brian Robinson, which is fine for a third round rookie.
Mhm.
And then we probably go back to Antonio. I mean, Antonio Gibson at times has had some of the one of the largest workloads in the league at times in his early career. Not quite Najee Harris, but
Sure.
certainly high 60s. So yeah. If Antonio Gibson's going to get high 60s, then we go back to the Kadarius Toney thing that we're never going to forget. And it's like all these things keep piling up, but really, like you said earlier, are we double counting? Are we triple counting?
Right.
Maybe the groin's nothing. They're taking precautions because he was injured so much in his first 2 years. Maybe Brian Robinson's they liked him as a depth piece, and he gets 5 touches a game. And maybe McKissick does what McKissick was doing, and we were overreacting. So This is the time of the year to say, take a step back. Don't just, read everything, get all the information, but then take a step back and say, am I overreacting to this information? If I look 7 weeks down the road, am I going to feel silly for how I feel right now?
Yeah, and if we're looking at it, if you're taking like you were talking about taking a step back and looking at the Washington's offense, this is a Carson Wentz led offense, the same Carson Wentz. I mean, so let's keep that same energy. If we're going to get super excited about Brian Robinson taking over for Antonio Gibson's injury during training camp, should we also be as excited about the fact that Carson Wentz is throwing multiple interceptions like in the same training camp? So if we're going to be attaching ourselves to an offense that's, at least according to training camp reports, which everybody's going to be excited about, if we're going to be attaching ourselves to an offense that's less likely to get into the red zone, which we know running backs need in order to be productive from a fantasy perspective, what's there to get excited about? Other than the fact that, again, we guessed the right guy to pick should the primary running back go down, which we thought we knew back in the March, April timeframe anyway. So again, it changes nothing for me, but it's just good to know that our priors from the draft are confirmed.
Yeah, and we got a little bit more time. Let's stay with the Commanders and just mention a name that a lot of people just completely wrote off in Curtis Samuel, who currently, right now, we've got news out that he's dealing with injury off to the side. Actually, let me correct that. Not necessarily injury. They've called it conditioning. So that could mean a lot of things right now because they don't really have to report what's actually wrong with anybody. So Ron Rivera says it's an issue with conditioning. Conditioning can be fixed. We're seeing that with Treylon Burks. He's had some positive hype coming out of Tennessee since we heard about the asthma. Won't get into that again. I'll get fired up again on that one. So back to Curtis Samuel. I mean, this is another situation in which getting a huge discount in best ball right now. Huge discount in Dynasty right now, and could all be an overreaction. Hurt last year, all year, sure, but he comes to play with Ron Rivera, his prior coach with the Carolina Panthers, and we expected him to get utilized in essentially a primary role. I mean, Diami Brown didn't pan out. They did draft Jahan Dotson, but there should be room for Curtis Samuel to be that 5-6 target a game guy who has a lot of big playability. So Curtis Samuel, just don't remember to just kind of earmark Curtis Samuel. And if he's somebody that you want to get in on, it's got to be before like preseason when he breaks, a slant for 40 yards or something like that.
Right.
So that's a name that I wanted to get out into the ether while it's a little bit negative around him. Because in 2 weeks, when we've got some preseason games under our belt, we're going to say, oh yeah, we've got some news about Curtis Samuel.
Right. Yeah.
Everyone's going to say, oh, same thing's happening with Paris Campbell. Everybody's like, oh wait, I forgot Paris Campbell existed. Well, yeah, that's what happens when you're hurt. So I guess that's another name to put out there. Paris Campbell is looking like he might take over at that second receiver spot ahead of Alec Pierce. That's going to do it for today. Do you have anything else to add to the show?
No, I think that's it.
All right, so first week of training camp, we did get a lot of news, but a lot of it is like things that you can just parse through pretty easily. A lot of injuries that weren't really injuries, like Najee Harris hurt his foot, but it's fine. Pat Mahomes hurt his foot, it's fine. So next week we should probably have a lot. We've got the Hall of Fame game going on Thursday, so we've got real football, real DFS opportunity out there coming up. So this is probably going to be our last show in which we don't have a insane amount of news to give you. So that's going to do it for me and for Chris. We thank you. Please like, subscribe, rate, review, and we will catch y'all next time.
Peace.